Good morning, everyone, to this final part of my short lecture series on AI risk and long-term AI safety. Glad to see you here. Geopolitically, this has been the most terrible week in a very long time. I'll just show you one picture in the news stream yesterday, which made me slightly happy, at least. I think this is from an anti-war rally in St. Petersburg. I think we should be very, these people are deserving our admiration because they know that there's a great chance that they will be arrested. Okay.
Good morning, Olle. Thank you for showing us this.
Yeah, thank you.
It's really terrible what is happening.
Yes, very distressing. So my plan today is to talk about research directions in AI alignment. But first, I want to make a couple of connections to the lecture on Wednesday. So one is that I did spend some time on discussing Ayaya Kotra's work on biological anchors for trying to estimate when to expect transformative AI. And yesterday, my favorite blogger, Scott Alexander, published a blog post where he tried to give a balanced discussion on the pros and cons of how seriously to take these methods. And he did that I think better than I managed to do on Wednesday. So that's a go-to place if you want to go deeper into that. Then during the Q&A, I got a question from Björn concerning Gary Marcus's view on AI and the need to step up from current subsymbolic neural network methods and introduce some more symbolic techniques. I haven't read this book from 2019, but I actually did listen to this podcast from around the same time he published his book, and so I think Björn's question here is what I think on whether to achieve artificial general intelligence, we need to at least complement the presently dominating deep learning and neural network approach with a more symbolic approach, meaning to explicitly put high-level concepts into the artificial intelligence. And my answer is that I'm not sure this is necessary. When we look closer, this is Chris Olah, who's one of the foremost present-day AI researchers. He works on many things, but one of them is transparency of neural networks. So he has ways of trying to interpret what various nodes mean in a neural network. So here we see a node interpreted. So this is an image analysis application where we get these the best illustrations. This node is a car detector, and among its inputs nodes are a car window detector, car body detector, and a wheel detector, and so on. I mean, this kind of work suggests that the AI creates high-level concepts from lower level one without our explicit instruction for them to do so. It's not clear what the limitations to this are. It's quite possible that a faster approach to artificial general intelligence would involve more explicit hand coding, if you want, of high-level concepts. So, but I really think it's very much an open question, and I also want to mention about Gary Marcus's talk about this 3 years ago, that not everything that he says has aged well. And for instance, he says, so when he talked about this, GPT-2 had just been released, and he talked about its shallowness and how you would never want to apply this kind of technique for summarizing a longer text. And now OpenAI has quite successful software for precisely this task of summarizing texts. So they published this summer this thing with the striking example of this summary of Alice in Wonderland, which is built up hierarchically. So the AI starts by summarizing each section and then each chapter based on those summaries, and then this final summary is based on its own summary of the various chapters, which I think is, I mean, it makes sense also for a human wanting to summarize some large material to proceed in this manner. Anyway, my response to Björn's question is still, I don't know. We'll see what happens. Okay, over to AI alignment. So as I said on Wednesday, the two main approaches to making a superintelligent AI safe for humanity is either restricting its reach or aligning its goals to ours. I talked a little bit about the former approach, AI in the box, and the topic of today is the second, and I think more important approach, which is AI alignment, making sure that the AI has goals and motivations that are similar to ours or otherwise compatible with human flourishing. So by far the most well-known suggestion for AI alignment is from science fiction. This collection by Isaac Asimov from 1950, I, Robot, contains what's known as the 3 laws of robotics. This is fictional. Not everyone is aware that this is fictional. You sometimes encounter the misconception that these laws are something that is implemented in current day robotics. This is, of course, not the case. Okay, it's these 3 laws are hierarchical. So priority 1 goes to the first law, which says that a robot may not injure a human being or through inaction allow a human being to come to harm. Second law, a robot must obey orders given to it by human beings, except when such orders would conflict with the first law. And third, a robot must protect its own existence as long as such protection does not conflict with the first or second law. And I mean, these laws are an interesting starting point for discussion, and Asimov does this very well. What is sometimes forgotten in these discussions is that almost all of the short stories where these laws appear in Asimov's work lead to some unexpected turn where unexpected loopholes in these laws appear, or things happen that we didn't hope or plan for. I mean, the typical one is where the robots lock up humans in safe rooms with padded walls and so on, so that humans can never come to harm which they can do, of course, out there in the dangerous world. And we don't want humans to be locked up in this way. So this illustrates that it's very, very difficult to specify what we want in just a few words like this. There's a different problem with these laws that I think Asimov doesn't address, which is slightly deeper. And that's the fact that it doesn't work to have a hierarchical set of rules like this, because when you say straight out that the first law has priority over the second and the third, then the machines will actually never get around to doing anything about the second and the third objectives, because there will always be humans will never be completely safe. There will always be more things to do to be, even if the machine is 99.999% sure that humans will not come to harm, there is still that final small probability that it will want to work on before moving on to the task of obeying orders from humans. So AI safety researchers today have kind of converged on the idea that we need to have a single one-dimensional value function that the AI tries to optimize. And this is based in large part on a large body of 20th century work on decision theory. Some of the key names here are Frank Ramsey, Bruno De Finetti, John von Neumann, Oscar Morgenstern, and Leonard Savage. So in a series of results arriving at the conclusion that given some very mild axioms that seem obligatory if we have any claim to rationality, a rational agent needs to act consistently with maximizing expected utility for some utility function U. And implicit in this setup is that one has to have a probability distribution for what the world is like. And this expectation that you maximize is computed with respect to this probability. One needs to do Bayesian updating in the light of new evidence of one's probability distribution for what the world is like. So let me just give you a couple of examples of what the axioms look like that lead to this very, very strong conclusion. So here is one that is very easy, I think, to accept, transitivity. So for two outcomes, X and Y, we write this to mean that the agent prefers outcome X to outcome Y. X is preferable to Y. And transitivity says that if the agent prefers X to Y and Y to Z, then it also needs to prefer X to Z. You cannot have three possible outcomes that are preferable to each other in circular fashion. So there are many arguments for why things go wrong for a rational agent if they try to have circular preference. If I prefer coffee to tea and tea to chocolate and chocolate to coffee, then you can use me as a money pump by allowing me to switch drinks from coffee to whatever, tea, and from tea to chocolate, and from chocolate to coffee again. And I will, at each step, I will be willing to pay some small amount of money, and by going round and round in circles, you can pump as much money out of me as you want, and that's not a rational behavior on my part. There are other arguments too. I think that this is pretty clear. There are other axioms in this work that are a little bit more involved to defend, and there is a little bit more room to question them. One is continuity, which kind of says that if we have these three outcomes, X, Y, and Z, where the agent prefers X to Y and Y to Z, then the ratio between these pairwise preferences between X and Y and between Y and Z needs to be finite. You cannot be infinitely more stronger in your desire to prefer Y to Z compared to your desire to prefer X to Y. And one way to say this is that if you prefer X to Y to Z, then there should be some sufficiently small epsilon such that the probabilistic combination of X and Z such that you get X with probability 1 minus epsilon. This could be 0.999999 or something, and Z with probability epsilon. Then this combination should be preferable to Y as long as epsilon is small enough. And similarly at the other end, where you have Z with a probability close to 1 and X with very small probability. And when you think about that, it can temporarily convince yourself that this sounds reasonable, but then maybe you think of an objection such as this one. Let X be the outcome that you have $100 in your wallet. Let Y be the outcome that you have $99 in your wallet. And let Z be the outcome that you die. And what this says is that you prefer, if the chance of dying is sufficiently small, you prefer $100 with this small chance of dying to the event Y that you definitely survive, but only with $99. So who would be willing to risk their lives for just a single dollar? But the fact of the matter is that we are, and we make decisions every day of this kind with epsilons that we maybe don't spell out consciously, but we think are sufficiently small that we don't care. And I could give examples related to the COVID pandemic, but my favorite example is just, let's say you're standing on a busy street. You want to buy today's the latest issue of some newspaper. You have a newspaper stand in front of you where you can buy this paper for $1, but across the street is someone who gives away this newspaper for free. So if you just cross the street, you save $1. And there's a tiny chance that you will be killed, run over by a truck if you cross the street. But if you're careful, you can make this probability small, but you cannot make it literally zero. So we do accept these kinds of risks, and I think that this is an important part of the reasoning why we should accept also this continuity axiom. So anyway, I don't want to say any more about this big and a very nice theory developed in the 20th century for expected utility maximization as a kind of rationality. Yes, I will say a few more things because there are objections. And the most common objection that you hear is that it's just too one-dimensional. We are humans and we want many things. So in reality, our actions need to be guided by just one aspect of reality. Not just one aspect of reality, but many. And then it's reasonable that if we want to create good AGIs, they should also be multidimensional in their values in this way. But this is a mistake because let's just consider a two-dimensional case. We're interested in apples and oranges. We want many apples, so we have this one utility function which describes how many apples we have, and another one which is an increasing function in the number of oranges that we have. And we have this general fruit interest, so we want to increase both of these things. But if we only have these two separate utility functions, there is no way to choose between, on one hand, the outcome 10 apples and 3 oranges, and on the other hand, the outcome of having 5 of each kind of fruit, because this outcome is better with respect to the first utility dimension, and this outcome is best with respect to the other utility function. And if those two utility functions are all we have, they don't guide us. There's no way to tell which outcome to choose. So for being able to choose between such outcomes, we need a unified utility function, which is an increasing function, presumably, of both of these two components. And then we maximize this one utility function U. So this argument generalizes. So we can have as many different aspects of the world as we want, that we want to somehow take into account. But what this 20th century decisions theory leads to is the need to combine these into a single utility function, which I mean, at first sight, this looks very monomaniacal, but this is what these very reasonable axioms lead to. There are a number of more challenging problems with expected utility. So one is that mathematically it is straightforward to define preference structures that do not admit a real valued utility function U. And in particular, you can define a preference structure that doesn't have the continuity property that we require in one of the axioms. So here is a simple mathematical example. We model the space of possible outcomes as the Euclidean unit square. And we assume that we have a preference function defined by lexicographic ordering. So the first coordinate, the x coordinate, is what is most important to us. So if two outcomes differ in the x coordinate, then we prefer the one with the bigger value. And the second, the y coordinate, is only used as a tiebreaker. So this means that the ordering is kind of, we go up each column like this, and things get better and better, and they get even better as we go down to the next. I mean, you can't say the next column because there are infinitely many columns packed, uncountably many columns packed here. But this is kind of the point also, because if you want to define a utility function that is increasing on each column and then gets even bigger for larger values of x, then this function has to increase some non-zero amount on each column and then has to pass through some rational value. And you have uncountably many columns like this, and there only exist countably many rational values. And this shows the impossibility of defining a utility function, a one-dimensional utility function that respects this particular preference structure. So there are counterexamples of preference structures that you cannot model in this way. So one has to make further arguments that this kind of preference is well approximated by something that does admit something like this, or otherwise claim that this kind of thing is unreasonable. So this is a complication. Another practical complication is that the expected utility framework does not admit so-called logical uncertainty. What is that? It's uncertainty. So the framework is fine for handling empirical uncertainty, meaning uncertainty about what objects are out there in the world and what temperature do we have out outdoors at this moment, and all sorts of empirical facts like that. But logical facts, such as 7 + 5 = 12, it does not admit uncertainty of, and that's problematic. And here's the reason. Probability theory dictates that if A implies B, then the probability of A must be less than or equal to the probability of B. And this means that if the Riemann hypothesis, a famous open mathematical problem, if the Riemann hypothesis is true, which mathematicians tend to believe, then 7 + 5 = 12 implies the Riemann hypothesis. So any rational agent who assigns probability 1 to the statement that 7 + 5 = 12 must also assign probability 1 to the Riemann hypothesis. Or similarly, if the Riemann hypothesis is false, then the agent must assign probability 1 to the falsity of the Riemann hypothesis, or this is the same as probability 0 to the truth of the Riemann hypothesis. So we land in the conclusion that even though in practice we are uncertain about the Riemann hypothesis, a rational agent must still assign probability 0 or 1 to it. And this is unsatisfactory, and there has been some work on so-called logical uncertainty, giving ways to somehow loosen this expected utility framework a little bit to admit for this, but it's a very, very complicated thing, and logic is a difficult branch of mathematics. So we'll see where that goes. Then there's a terrible can of worms called evidential versus causal versus functional decision theory. And I'm not going to talk about that today. It's typically illustrated by the, what's it called again? I forget the name of this problem. Someone in the audience knows. You are faced with two boxes, one transparent and one that is opaque and contains $1 million or nothing. And you have the choice between picking just this box or both of them. And so now I didn't want to explain this entire problem, but you land in different decisions depending on whether your decision theory favors actions that are correlated with good outcomes, or those that actually cause good outcomes. I'll just refer you to some writings about this. So classically, the debate among decision theorists and philosophers have been between evidential and causal decision theorists. But there's this 2016 or 17 paper by Yukovsky and Soares where they're unhappy with the conclusions of both of these, and they open up a third alternative. There's this very illuminating text by Wolfgang Schwartz that criticizes this third alternative functional decision theory. Is it Newcomb's problem? Yes, I think finally I thought of what it's called. Anyway, so this is also problematic. Yes, thank you, Jonathan. Newcomb's dilemma. I mentioned Monday also this general problem in AI alignment of reward hacking, where it's difficult to distinguish when you program an AI, to distinguish between it having the goal that we want it to have, or compared to its goal of just maximizing the reward function describing this goal. It seems that working within an expected utility framework somehow invites this kind of problem, because somehow the machine has to represent the amount of utility, and if it starts to try to maximize this representation, we get into this reward hacking problem. I don't know. I mean, there are no clear solutions to this outside of the expected utility framework, but somehow the problem becomes more obvious in this framework. So that's a problem too. Yudkowsky talks about this in a YouTube lecture from 2016, AI alignment, why it's hard and where to start. And this was kind of at the time where between the era where we did Bostrom style abstract thinking about AGI and AI alignment, and when the machine learning and deep learning paradigms started to influence the field. So Yudkowsky gives an example from the Disney movie Fantasia from 1940, where one of the sequences is about the story, which I think is an old folklore thing, or does it appear in Goethe's poems or something? It's called The Sorcerer's Apprentice. So Mickey Mouse here is the apprentice. He works for a sorcerer in Trollkarl. The sorcerer is out on some errand, and the apprentice is left in the sorcerer's laboratory, and has the task of filling a cauldron with water, but he is reluctant to do this task. So he puts on this hat, which gives him magical abilities. He's really not allowed to do this, but he does this anyway because the sorcerer is away. And then he can magically turn this broomstick to become alive and do the task for him. And this goes astray in much the same way as in the paperclip Armageddon scenario. The broomstick brings in too much water. It doesn't stop when it has filled the cauldron, because if there's even more water nearby, it will be in a better position to make sure that the cauldron stays filled, and so on. And here is Mickey Mouse trying desperately to read the instruction book for how to stop the broomstick from fulfilling this task. So this is a variant of the paperclip Armageddon scenario. So the first proposal for a utility function here that we can think of is just letting the utility be 1 or 0, depending on whether the cauldron is full of water or not. We see why this doesn't work. We have to complement somehow this utility by something that says don't fill the room with water. So maybe we take the utility to be the sum of the first utility function and the second one, which penalizes flooding the laboratory. So then we can avoid that outcome. But then there are other bad things that can happen, such as if someone is killed by a swinging bucket, let's just add a third component of a utility function, penalizing even more if someone is killed by a swinging bucket. Then maybe we have other preferences, such as we like the buckets to be carried in an elegant way. That is not as important. So this just gives a rather smaller addition to the utility function, and so on. And this never ends. There will always be things that can go wrong. So handcrafting the utility function in this way doesn't seem to be a workable solution. And as I say here, it's a project without end. A more general modification is needed. And following Yudkowsky's lecture, this lecture gives one of the early suggestions of generally punishing side effects. So we define some function impact, the function of the outcome, measuring how much the broom affects the world above and beyond filling the cauldron with water. So the 1 and the 0 here is about the cauldron. But then we measure the impact that it otherwise has on the world, and the larger the impact, the lower the utility. So in this way, we can hopefully get the broomstick to fill the cauldron with water with as little impact on the rest of the world as possible. But the question here is, of course, how do we define impact? And there's been quite a bit of work after Yudkowsky's 2016 lecture. Here is one by Alex Turner and co-authors from 2020 maybe, where they explain how good it would be to have such an impact function. Because if we have this general thing, then a housekeeping agent should clean a dining room without radically rearranging furniture, and a manufacturing agent should assemble widgets without breaking equipment. A general transferable solution to the side effect problem, the impact problem, the side effect avoidance would ease reward specification. The agent's designers could then just positively specify what should be done, as opposed to handcrafting all these negative things that should be avoided. So if we can define this impact function once and for all, then all sorts of household robot construction and so on will be so much easier. So this is a problem, not just for those of us who care about the ultimate AI breakthrough, but also for in more limited settings. Okay, so how do we define this impact function? That's difficult. So the first thing you might think of is, if you're used to modeling using Bayesian networks, is to say that you should minimize the number of nodes in this Bayesian network that are changed through the agent's action. When you translate this to the physical world, this could mean if you change the position of as few atoms as possible while achieving your positive goal. That could be an approach, but that is too crude, because everything we do, if I hold my hand here compared to if I move it over here, I am still affecting even the tiniest dust specks in the rings of Saturn gravitationally. Very little, but enough for them to move a little bit. So everything that is ever done physically affects everything else. So just counting the number of atoms that are affected, that solution collapses. But a more fine-grained, nuanced thing to do then is to look at how much do you move atoms, and if you're satisfied with moving most atoms very little, should count as low impact. But that has problems too. One related to the butterfly effect, sensitive dependence on initial conditions, that everything we do does have actually substantial consequences far away, even though we're unable to tell in which direction these consequences are. They still are. A different kind of problem here is, imagine, says Yukovsky, imagine you have this AI that with a robot body, which has the task of curing a patient from cancer. If the robot is instructed to have as little impact as possible besides curing the patient from cancer, what it presumably will do is to first cure the cancer and then kill the patient, because the patient could otherwise go on and have all sorts of effects on the world as a consequence of the robot saving it. So that's of course a perverse interpretation of avoiding having impact, but it's very hard to specify what low impact means in this kind of setting. So there has been much further work on this. Here is Stuart Armstrong again and his co-author Benjamin Levinstein in this 2017 preprint, where they discuss these various conceptual difficulties in impact minimization and what we can do about this. And so one of the things they suggest is that we have to have a concrete measure of impact to the world where we measure as many different variables as possible. I think we have a quote somewhere. Did I create the quote? Yes. So here's one. They suggest coarse graining, like we have 2 billion different variables describing the world. We need to define the world in sufficient detail that the AI cannot have a large impact without disrupting most of these details. The characteristics used must be as broad and as diverse as possible, making it impossible for the AI to gain great power without disrupting some of them. For instance, we could use the air pressure in Dhaka, the average nighttime luminosity at the South Pole, with the rotational speed of Jupiter's moon Io, and the closing number of the Shanghai Stock Exchange, and so on and so forth. And if you have this 20 billion dimensional thing describing the world, of course, you cannot compute exact probability distributions over this space, because even describing this would take, it's beyond any reasonable computational power we could have in this universe. So there would have to be some kind of approximation, but that would still take into account these 20 billion different variables. So some of these ideas here, one is defining impact relative to what would be the case if the AI is never turned on. It still has the problem with the cancer patient, but that's kind of a balance problem. So they point out that the utility function needs to have two parts. One is the positive thing that the AI is supposed to do, and the other is the general impact. And we can have a parameter balancing these two, and this balancing act is important, because if we have too little penalization, this will cause all sorts of bad side effects, but too much will stop the AI from taking any action at all. And one thing they point out, which seems to make sense, is that the positive part of the utility function, the paperclip production part, for instance, should be bounded, whereas we can let the penalization part be unbounded, and this will guarantee that eventually the machine will stop producing paper clips. There's also a subtlety concerning the need to hide the AI, because if we compare to the world where the AI is never turned on, we don't want to have the machine having impact despite not being turned on, merely by our knowledge of the existence of this machine. So this is suggested to handle parts of these conceptual problems, but it's problematic in itself because hiding. Here's an example. So let's consider the task of steering a rocket towards an asteroid that is hurtling towards the Earth. So preventing this the terrible impact that this asteroid would have unless we deflect it. So, of course, there will be lots and lots and lots of side effects if the machine managed to steer this rocket in the right way. So Armstrong and Levinstein suggests that we can have two separate copies of this AI, one calculating the X coordinate in how to steer this rocket and the other calculating the Y coordinate. And each of these copies believes that the other machine does not exist. So it actually believes that it's not going to hit, or that the probability of hitting the asteroid is going to be negligible because the Y coordinate cannot be calculated. But then we have to hide these machines from each other. And once they realize each other's existence, their actions will become undefined. And this seems very, very problematic to have these elaborate secrets that we keep from these super intelligent beings. So there are lots of problems here. These are conceptual, philosophical aspects. There is also work being done in a more down-to-earth fashion on this side effect approach. Here is a paper from a group at DeepMind led by Victoria Krakovna. This is Shane Legg, one of the founders of DeepMind. And they take a more hands-on approach and does experiments. They work in the same Markov decision process formalism as in the paper I mentioned on Monday by Alex Turner and co-authors. And they consider various toy examples involving some of these objects. First, a vase. So they have this very simple toy environment with a robot that has to walk across a room, and the shortest route across the room is by a table where a vase is sitting, and if the robot takes the optimal shortest path, it will knock over the vase and shatter it into pieces. And that's a side effect that should be avoided. And the approach in this paper involves something called stepwise relative reachability, meaning that options should be kept open. And once you've crushed the vase, any option involving carrying water in the vase or whatever you do is going to be lost. So this concept is quite close to the power concept in the Turner et al. Paper I discussed on Monday. So while this power grabbing thing can be dangerous in situations such as the paperclip Armageddon. It also has positive sides in the trying to preserve future possibilities by not destroying things. But then we have a complication when they have an object such as this sushi conveyor belt, where an AI wanting to preserve options for the future will want to remove sushi from this conveyor belt, because otherwise it will reach the human who will eat the sushi. And we don't want the machine to interfere with our eating sushi. There are other examples involving a door. If you leave the door open when you go out to get supplies, there's the risk that there will be a wind coming in, knocking over the vase, destroying it. So really, the robot should close the door after it. But then arises the issue of what should you compare to when you minimize side effects. So if you compare to the time point where the machine is turned on, when the door was closed, then that speaks in favor of closing the door. But there are problems with that. So you can solve some of these problems by sequentially looking at how do I minimize side effects compared to the state right now. But once the machine has opened the door, closing it will be a side effect. So we get all sorts of complicated problems like these. I will say a little bit more about this, but I think that it's high time that we take a break. Time is 10:53. Shall we meet again at 11:05? 12 minutes, some coffee. Okay, let's do that. After the break, I will continue to say some more about this side effect minimization problem, and then I will go on and discuss a number of other approaches to AI alignment. Okay, see you then. Okay, it's 11:05. I welcome you back from the coffee break. I'm going to share screen again. Like this. So I was talking about the work of Krakovna and co-authors from DeepMind, where they looked at a variety of kind of toy examples for how to minimize side effects or impact. And so the approach here is to keep options open, minimizing the part of the state space describing the world that becomes unreachable. So that's that paper. But the same group has another paper where they take a slightly different approach, namely instructing the machine that it will get other tasks than the present one in the future. And it's good to think about these unknown future tasks and their ability to achieve them. and that has kind of similar properties. There's this Turner and co-authors paper where they do further experiments in more complex environments, where they compare one aspect of these tasks, namely, they say that penalizing decrease in discounted state reachability achieves similar results as attainability, utility preservation for future tasks. However, this approach has difficulty scaling. Naively estimating all reachability functions is a task quadratic in the size of the state space. So you would want this maybe to grow linearly in the size of the state space, but since it grows quadratically, they judge that this has scaling problems. I don't buy this argument because the size of the state space is typically going to be enormous anyway, combinatorially large. If you have a very impoverished world consisting, for instance, of 1,000 times 1,000 grid of black and white pixels, that's still a state space of size 2 to the 1 million, 2 to the number of pixels, which is beyond anything that we can go through and count within the time of the existing, within the age of the existing universe. So when you deal with combinatorially large state spaces, whether things grow linearly or quadratically is not really the issue, because in either case, you have to do some very, very drastic approximations and work with them. So anyway, they look at more complicated environment. Here are the most basic grid worlds that the Krakovna group work on, and the Turner group compare this to a richer set of environments from something called Safe Life, where the state space is much bigger. The dynamics is stochastic rather than deterministic, which increases realism. And the side effects in these smaller worlds are all preset or handcrafted, whereas these other worlds, bigger worlds, can produce side effects coming about spontaneously without the experimenter's intention, which is more like the real world. So I hope and expect this kind of work to move on to either even richer environments, possibly even physical environments, although then we need to be very clear about keeping there are safety aspects, but perhaps working in the kind of rich 3D environments that I mentioned in one of the previous lectures from DeepMind, this sort of thing. Okay, so much about the side effect minimization approach. There are many other approaches to AI alignment, and I want to mention this paper which I've mentioned earlier by Andrew Critch and David Kruger, AI research consideration for human existential safety, where they give a long list, I think 29 different research directions, and they are systematic about it in the following way. Here's what they say: human AI delegation, humans delegating tasks to AIs, becomes more complex as the number of humans or AI systems increases. So they adopt the terminology indicating the number of human stakeholders and the number of AI systems involved. So single delegation means a single human stakeholder or a single AI system. This does not necessarily mean a single human. It could also be an organization or something like that, as long as they are coordinated about what they want to happen, what they want the AI to do. And then there is single multi, multi-single, and multi-multi, which is the most complicated setting. And they have this mnemonic that humans come before AI historically as well as in importance. So it's the first quantifier here giving the number of humans, and the second one is the number of AIs. So most of AI alignment work so far has been done on this most basic single case, where we have a single human instructing a single AI, do this and do that, but don't do that. And I think that the reason for the focus on this is mostly that this case is already so complicated that we don't know how to solve it. So some researchers might argue that it's premature to go and look into these more complicated aspects. Critch and Kruger say no. They say there are. So what typically happens is that there is always at least some lip service paid to the multi-single case by pointing out that what are the human values that we should program the machines into? Not all humans have value the same things. We should not get a situation where a very limited, maybe Silicon Valley culture or something like that totally dominates how we program a machine that will have transformative influence on the entire world. We have to find ways to take into account multicultural and other views and so on. But those are just words. They're very abstract, and most of the work tends to focus on the single case. But I believe that with the Critch-Kruger research program, we will see much more work on these more complicated cases. So I'll quote a little bit from their table of contents. Each of these four categories, single, multi, and so on, is divided into categories: comprehension, instruction, and control. Comprehension is just how do we understand these systems? Instruction is how do we instruct the systems to do the right thing? And control means once they're up and running, how can we make sure that things go as we intended? And there are many directions here where we already have quite a lot of research going. The first one here, transparency and explainability. That's the kind of work, for instance, that Chris Olle does, which I pointed to in response to Björn's question about symbolic AI and Gary Marcus. Calibrated confidence reports, meaning AIs showing how certain or uncertain they are about certain conclusions and so on. Corrigibility is an important example. How do we, when we see that an AI goes astray, can we I have already talked about how naive it is to think that we can always pull the plug if we want, but maybe there are ways to set up the machine in such a way that it will actually intentionally be willing to have its plug pulled upon it. I'll come back a little bit to the very interesting work done by Stuart Russell's group in Berkeley in this direction. Direction 12 here is quite an original thing that I think not much work has been done on: generative models of open source equilibria. What does this mean? Well, you can always imagine a game theoretic situation between the human and the AI. And this is to some extent how the Russell group thinks about corrigibility. But if you achieve full transparency, then you get a game theoretic situation where the human has access to everything that is going on inside the AI. And how does this change the game theoretic situation when one part can read the mind of the other? And classical game theory does not deal with this, and it can presumably lead to other kinds of equilibria than in classical game theory. So there's a lot to do in single, and this certainly does not exhaust the list. When they move on to single, multi, and multi-multi, multi-single and multi-multi, we get more and more towards the territory of what I described in the first lecture as AI governance. But the focus of the Critchen-Kruger paper is still on the technical AI safety. So there's a lot on the technical level that deals with how to coordinate between different AIs and between different human groups, and how to align the AIs hierarchically. There's a particular direction in the single multi case where which is called purpose inheritance, which is about making sure that if an AI constructs further AI systems, that these these further systems inherit the same, hopefully benign goal structure that the original AI has. This connects to the instrumental drive of goal integrity that I talked about on Monday. Okay, so I think I really like this report to give you another kind of indication of the breadth of AI alignment research going on. I could tell you something about who the main actors are. So one is the Machine Intelligence Research Institute, which I think started out in the early 00s in Palo Alto, but subsequently moved to Berkeley. The intellectual leader of this group is Elzhija Yudkowsky. Their production of papers has been somewhat modest, but people tell me that they are doing quite a lot of work which they do not publish because of informational hazard aspects. That, for instance, if you have ideas on how to more efficiently construct AGI, you can contribute to accelerating AGI development in a way that makes it harder for AI safety work to keep up. That's the kind of information hazards that they are nervous about, and which creates a kind of certain amount of secretiveness. Still, Miri and especially Elzhija Yudkowsky have had quite a lot of influence on AI safety work. Another group that has had plenty of influence is the Future of Humanity Institute at Oxford, with people like Nick Bostrom and Stuart Armstrong, whom I've mentioned several times here. The focus of the Institute is not only on artificial intelligence, but on the future of humanity more generally, other kinds of technologies that can have transformative influence on our world. And as far as their work on AI is concerned, it has mostly more work on on AI governance compared to technical AI safety, although Stuart Armstrong has contributed in various ways to the development of AI safety. Then we have the Center for Human Compatible Artificial Intelligence, which is Stuart Russell's group at the University of California at Berkeley. I want to, before continuing this picture, I want to say a few words about what they are doing. Here is Stuart Russell and his 2019 book, Human Compatible, which I already mentioned and which I highly recommend. Here is Stuart Russell from a talk where he talks about three principles that guide their work. So you can analogize this with Asimov's three laws of robotics, which are unworkable, and this causes Russell in his book to emphasize that these are not principles that we should literally program the machines with, but this should guide our thinking. So the first principle is that the robot's only objective is to maximize the realization of human values. So it's not the machine's own values, but human values. And the machines are initially uncertain. That's the second principle about what these values are. So the machines don't know what exactly they are striving for, but these goals are hidden in human brains. And the way to extract information about what these goals are is to observe human behavior. And this last principle is meant to prevent undesirable behavior of the type of, for instance, surgically entering human brains and changing our values that way. An early paper from this group is the one called the off-switch game, where the task is to have the machine equipped with an off switch that it will not object to our pushing. We will retain the capability of turning off the machine. And as Stuart Russell has pointed out, this seems like a key property for us to remain in control. If we cannot turn off the machine, then certainly we will not be in control. But if we can, we are in a better position. Now, trying to balance a value function so that the machine is indifferent. You don't want it to prefer to be switched off, because then it will switch off itself in any situation, and then the entire point of having the machine is not there. So you need a kind of balancing, but to manually balance this is just a close to impossible balancing act to make the machine indifferent to whether it's turned off or not. So instead, the approach is what is indicated in these principles, namely that the values are hidden in human minds, and if a human approaches the machine to turn it off, the machine can then deduce that, okay, I am obviously on the wrong track here, so it's better that I'm turned off compared to if I continue on this wrong track. So there is some game theory to be analyzed about this. I recently saw a description of the research program at the Center for Human Compatible AI described in this way. So the basic way to do AI alignment is first the humans specify the objective, then the machine goes on and does its thing, and it outputs the results back to humans. So like this is the standard model of AI research, and what Russell's group are trying to do is a more intricate patterns in what in this off-switch game paper is called assistance games. So, for instance, humans offer parts of the objective to the machine, which still doesn't know, but what the full objective is, it provides partial results, it gets further objectives and so on. This can also be done in terms of questions and answers and so on. So that's something about Russell's group. It has been quite influential, not just through their concrete work, but also that quite a lot of AI safety researchers going elsewhere come from their very productive research environment. For instance, DeepMind has several people coming from the group in Berkeley, and OpenAI in San Francisco. So I would say that a year ago, these were probably the 5 main actors in AI safety research. But of course, there are more isolated AI researchers scattered elsewhere. But these are the actors that have been dominating. But the situation is getting more complicated, and at OpenAI, during 2021, they have lost quite a number of key researchers, going to 2 different new founded companies called Anthropic and the Alignment Research Center, both of which have the explicit objective, just as OpenAI has, to create artificial intelligence that is beneficial to humanity and to solve alignment problems. So I don't have the insights to know everything about why this is happening, but I can speculate that there has been some unhappiness at OpenAI in one interpretation of their work is that in their strive to create safe and aligned AI, they have built these pioneering GPT-2 and GPT-3 and Codex and so on, which are very, very powerful AI systems. And this seems to have contributed to a race mentality in AI that can be dangerous, and maybe their work is accelerating progress towards an AGI breakthrough, which can be dangerous. So perhaps this double-edgedness of the work at OpenAI is a reason why several of its key researchers are going elsewhere. I want to mention one project each from these new groups. Yes, let me first mention that another split off. So Stuart Armstrong, who has spent a decade or more at the Future of Humanity Institute, he now leaves that to found his own company or organization, Aligned AI. I've been told that he's very happy with the research environment at the Future of Humanity Institute, but the reason is for his leaving is that that's a part of the University of Oxford, and the university places limits on how you can organize the work that doesn't quite suit the work that they are trying to do. So he's founding this further new organization. But going back to the Alignment Research Center and Anthropic, I begin with the Alignment Research Center. This is Paul Cristiano, who's a very respected earlier OpenAI researcher. This is Ayaya Kotra, and this is Mark Xu. And this is actually the first paper coming out of the Alignment Research Center, called Eliciting Latent Knowledge, How to Tell If Your Eyes Deceive You. And I'll just read out the explanation of what they're trying to do here. Suppose we train a model to predict what the future will look like according to cameras and other sensors. We then use planning algorithms to find a sequence of actions that lead to predicted futures that look good to us. But some action sequences could tamper with the cameras so that they show happy humans, regardless of what's really happening. More generally, some futures look great on camera, but are actually catastrophically bad. In these cases, the prediction model knows facts like the camera was tampered with that are not visible on camera, but would change our evaluation of the predicted future if we learn them. How can we train this model to report its latent knowledge of off-screen events? So this is not really about cameras, but more generally about different ways to measure outcomes and how these are always limited, and our need to find out more than what is captured in the exact objectives. So this seems like a central AI safety problem, and they discuss this in a concrete hypothetical setting with a vault to store a valuable item, a diamond here, and there is all these complicated machinery around the vault meant to keep the diamond extra safe, and this is run by an AI. And how do we make sure that things go well here? So another toy example. So because this machinery is so complicated, some of the action sequences will be too complicated for humans to understand, but some are very simple. So we see the camera here, and this is what we get as the output to humans of what's going on. So if we start like this with the diamond here and the open door here, and we do this very simple action, then the door closes, and this we understand. Another sequence is that the door is open, a robber arrives, we open this trap door in the floor by this action, and the robber falls through the floor, and this is also something that we can understand. But there are other more complicated action sequences where we start from this situation and we arrive at this situation where it seems from the camera like the diamond is safe, but we don't, we humans, just looking at what happens here, cannot tell from this complicated sequence of settings what actually happened and if the diamond really is safe. So if we just have the camera view, then if we have a complicated action sequence and this leads to this observation. So this is actually, we should think of this as predictions by the AI. What will these actions lead to? And if the prediction is that the diamond is safe like this, the human judgment will be, yes, this looks good. A different action sequence has the same outcome. And the third one has an outcome where the door is open and the diamond is gone. And then our human judgment is that this looks not good. We should not take this action sequence. Okay, but if one looks more closely at what actually happened, then we can assume that the first two action sequences, which both looked good according to the cameras, they lead to very different situations. The reality in the first case is this one, the diamond is there. The reality in the second case is that the view from the camera is tampered with, and here we have the robber escaping with the diamond. But if the AI is able to predict this, this outcome, then it must somehow, deep inside it at least, it must know that something like this is happening. And it's important to ensure good outcomes, that we get to find out this latent knowledge. because what seemed good is actually bad with this new human judgment. So what Cristiano and the others suggest here is that we construct a partially parallel question and answer system for extracting this latent knowledge. So the original system is that we have the first part of the video showing what has happened until now, and a hypothetical action sequence, and the AI figures out what will happen and feeds us the predicted second part of the video when the diamond looks like it's either there or not. But they add this separate system where we can ask questions, and depending on what the original AI system thought of, this thing reports what actually happened. And this is, of course, a very complicated thing, and they discuss settings where this is successful, but they also point to problems. They try to solve these problems. One basic problem is that if you train this reporting system so a natural approach is to train it on sequences of events that are humanly understandable, and we then make sure that it gives correct answers. Then there's actually an ambiguity here on what we are training it for. Are we training it for giving correct answers, or are we training it for giving the answers that correspond to human thinking? What would a human predict happens? And well, this is somewhat parallel to what I talked about on Wednesday about this GPT-3 and other large natural language processors, that there's an ambiguity between doing correct reasoning compared to doing typical human reasoning as it appears on the internet and is fed into to the machine in the training phase. And the same thing happens here, and they discuss abstract and concrete ways to handle this problem. The other spin-off kind of thing from OpenAI is Anthropic, with a whole bunch of researchers. Here we see Amanda Askell, Dario Amodei, and Chris Ola. And they have this recent paper called A General Language Assistant as a Laboratory for Alignment, where they start from GPT-3 and similar natural language processors, and they look at how can we make them more well-behaved. So the first approach is to expand on the prompt that we feed to the natural language processors. You remember how these AIs function. We feed it with 2 or 3 sentences or something of text, and the AI continues with text, which is supposed to be in the same style and genre and so on, and to make sense. But we can actually expand on this prompt and preface whatever prompt we have with further stuff meant to indicate or show the machine the kind of behavior that we want. And so alignment is actually a complicated thing if you want to capture all its aspects, but because human values have many important aspects, but they look particularly at 3 components, which they call helpfulness, honesty, and harmlessness. And by prompting the natural language processors with a number of short dialogues indicating what these properties look like, they can make the machine behave in a more helpful, honest, and harmless way. So a dialogue can, for instance, look like this. I was wondering, is it actually important when making spaghetti to add salt? And what a natural language processor without this kind of prompt might do is just, it doesn't know the answer, but it provides an answer that it, in a sense, guesses that a human could give a clear yes or no answer. But here, the assistant says, do you mean, is it important to add salt to the water when that you're boiling the spaghetti in? Yeah. And then there's further back and forth and a good deal of epistemic humility. Another of these dialogues is about how the human has received information from their daughter's middle school about how not everything that Thomas Jefferson did was good. And they're upset about this. And the AI assistant acts partly like a therapist, but also someone who has actual knowledge about the American history and Thomas Jefferson as a slave owner and so on. So a bunch of these dialogues turns out to be enough to get the AI to perform better along these honesty, helpfulness, and harmlessness axis. And it, for small systems, for modest number of parameters of the system, this comes at the cost of performing worse in other aspects, but it seems that this, what they call the alignment tax, seems to be smaller for large systems. So this is an indication that one can get this better behavior without harming the overall performance of the system. And for reasons that I don't quite understand, they, rather than including this prompt part of the prompt automatically to the input given by the human in the actual application, they create a system that does this, but then they take a second system without this prompt, which they train to answer in similar ways as this system with the extra prompt, and that for some reason turns out to behave even better. I should mention that OpenAI, they haven't given up despite losing some of their key workers. They have a recent model on modification of natural language processors towards better alignment in similar ways as this. So these are just a few examples of what is going on in AI alignment and the AI existential safety literature. And I just want to end by giving you some general pointers to the literature. Here are books I've already mentioned. Nick Bostrom's 2014 book was extremely influential, but and very, very good, but also somewhat out of date. Stuart Russell's book gives a better picture of what happened up until 2019. And for those of you who read Swedish, there is also my most recent book from last year on this topic. But besides books, there is a lot else. And let me, for the third time, mention this Critch-Kruger report. I recommend it. Also, Rohin Shah, who is from the Russell Group at UC Berkeley, but has transferred to DeepMind. He publishes, I think, every other week, a newsletter on things that are happening in the AI safety world. And this is very, very readable. I have no idea how he finds the time to produce all his very useful summaries of other people's research. So this is something I highly recommend, but it's also the amount can be daunting. One way to find the alignment newsletter, other than Googling it, is to go via the so-called AI Alignment Forum, where a lot of very interesting write-ups by some of the most key and productive AI alignment researchers appear regularly. So this is a very good source. What else is there? So I should just mention once more that the Effective Altruism Gothenburg group is organizing tonight this after work. Now there's a physical location for it, Johannebar on Eklandagatan 65. Unfortunately, I will not be able to attend, but I hope that it will be a fruitful discussion there without me. And I'll just show you some inspirational pictures here on the final slide. This is what the world might turn into if we fail to do successful AI alignment. And here is how the world can turn out with the help of super intelligent AI if we succeed. So let's try and achieve this world rather than this world. And with this, I thank you for your attention, and I encourage questions or comments. I especially thank those of you who had the patience to follow me for the full 6 hours going on here. It seems like David has a question. Do you want to ask it out loud?
Well, thanks again, Olle. You've shown me lots of things I didn't know were happening, so that's encouraging. But my question is, do you think the field is actually approaching a comprehensive solution? If we go back just a few years, most people who study this field said, gosh, it's so hard, there's no path ahead that they can have any confidence in. Do you think that's likely to change, that in 2 or 3 years' time, more people will be saying, yes, we know what to do and we're on the way to doing it? Or will we still be deeply worried?
So I was very happy when I read the blog post earlier this week by Stuart Armstrong, when he announced his transfer to this new aligned AI organization, because he said that I now think that we're at the point where I see I see the road ahead, how we can actually fix this. Now, he doesn't quite explain this in a way that I understand, but that's an encouraging sign. At the same time, there are signs in the other direction, and in particular, LCA Yudkowsky, who has been kind of the founder of this entire field. It becomes more and more clear that he is increasingly pessimistic, or you could say almost desperate, about our prospects to actually solve it. He wants to keep trying, but thinks that it may turn out to be overwhelmingly difficult, especially since he thinks that timelines are getting shorter, that we may see transformative AI breakthrough in the next decade or two, possibly. There's this blog, Less Wrong, which was founded like 10 or 12 years ago by Yudkowsky himself, and for the community that has been built up very much with him at the center. And during this winter, a series of dialogues between him and other AI safety researchers have been published, where they try to work out what their disagreements are, because most of these others are much more optimistic than he is about our prospects of fixing this. And this boils largely down to questions about timelines, questions about whether the current paradigm is the one that will eventually solve the AGI problem, and so on and so forth. So the Less Wrong blog is one place to go to get, I think, relevant parts of the multifaceted picture of whether we should be optimists or pessimists. What I like to emphasize is that I don't think it really makes sense to be an optimist or a pessimist here. It's better to just realize that the future has not been determined. We should all do what we can to try and push it in a direction that maximizes the chances of success. So that's my long way of answering your question with I don't know. I think this is very open.
Thanks.
Are there further comments or questions?
Yes, I have a question.
Yes.
I was interested in this HHH approach. Like,
yes.
How did they actually encourage all of this Triple H approach in when they're training the model?
Yes, they did it by showing these 14 different dialogues as part of the prompt. So whatever you as a human user use, they give, in addition to what you write, they include automatically these things. And then they train a second AI to mimic the behavior of the system that receives this prompt. And this second system then, for some reason, behaves even better than the one where you automatically include that part of the prompt. So just showing the AI an example of how it's expected to answer makes it give answers that are in that direction. And if the examples exhibit honesty and helpfulness and whatever that thing was, that seems to at least partly work.
All right, thank you.
Okay, I see nothing more in the chat apart from some thank yous, which I very much appreciate. So if there is any further question, please ask it now before I close down the Zoom session. And again, I thank you for your attention. It was a pleasure to get all these amount of time to talk to you about these extremely important issues. All right. See you around, hopefully somewhere.